Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome all of you to Revolutionize Your Retirement, fourth Tuesday interview with expert series to help you create a fulfilling second half of life. I'm Dorian Mintzer, owner and president of Revolutionize Retirement and your host. So let me tell you about John. And I'm so delighted that you're here with us today, John. I met John at a recent saging conference that was out in Colorado in October, and I went to his workshop and was just so impressed with him. And I've subsequently done some reading of his books. So let me tell you about him, and then we will get started. John C. Robinson, and I should say there are multiple John C. Robinsons also. So if you want to Google him, make sure you put John C. Robinson Psychologist, and you'll get all kinds of great stuff. And his website will be telling you about it too, but there's wonderful material that you'll be able to get there, and that's www.johnrobinson.org, just so you can know that from the get-go. John is a clinical psychologist with a second doctorate in ministry. He's an ordained interfaith minister and the author of 9 books on the interface of psychology and spirituality, along with numerous articles, book chapters, and guest blogs. And last but not least, he's an aging boomer himself with growing children and a whole bunch of grandchildren, of which the newest, I think, was just born in March. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Congratulations. He's a full-time writer now, and his interest has turned to the psychological, spiritual, and mystical potential of the new aging. His major works include his novel Breakthrough, which is a novel of the divine human. Another book is What Aging Men Want, The Odyssey as a Parable of Male Aging. The 3 Secrets of Aging, Seeking Enlightenment in the New Aging, Bedtime Stories for Elders, Fairy Tales for the Enlightened Elder, Finding Heaven Here, Awakening the Universal Realization of Heaven on Earth, Ordinary Enlightenment, Experiencing God's Presence in Everyday Life, Death of a Hero, Birth of the Soul, Finding True Self at Midlife, and But Where is God? Building a Meaningful Integration of Psychotherapy and Spirituality. And I also understand that for those of you who are members of the Life Planning Network, he has an article that's going to be in the upcoming Life Planning Network Quarterly on some of his work. So I encourage all of you, if you're not a member of Life Planning Network and are interested, you can learn about the Life Planning Network by going to lifeplanningnetwork.org. It was founded in Boston, but it's has chapters around the country, and there's actually a way that even if there's no chapter where you live, you can be a national member, and there are monthly calls for the national members, and all of the local chapters have programs, and there are these quarterly journals that are quite wonderful. So, without any further ado, I want to welcome you, John, and welcome you to welcome all of our guests that are here. And maybe we can start out by telling us how you got interested in this field. I know you've had this is your retirement career, your encore, although you've been interested in it for a long time. So maybe we could start with just talking a little of kind of what got you interested. And I know that some of your training in the interfaith ministry and your doctorate in divinity came after retirement. So maybe tell us a little about you and that, and we'll get started.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Dory. It's wonderful to be here with you. Yeah, so I was a psychologist in Sacramento for several decades, 3 decades plus, and doing my normal thing, too busy probably, and I had this medical crisis, this atrial fibrillation, and I was just working too hard, but it led to a whole series of cascading events and medical complications that caused me to realize that I think I need to move on to a new field. There's a part of me that has always longed to do else in this mystical, spiritual realm, and I was locked into my practice, and even though it was inconvenient, it's always inconvenient aging, but it asks you to give up who you used to be and and discover who else you could be and discover a new blossom of yourself. So that's what I did. I closed my practice. My wife and I, some other couples, moved up to the beautiful Northwest. We now live on an island, and I began writing about aging, because nobody tells you what aging is going to be like, and most of what they try to tell you, but most of it is wrong. And it's based on the history of grim and discouraging experiences throughout most of our evolution, but it's an entirely new experience now. So I have just fallen in love with the aging process and its gifts and tasks and opportunities and what it offers us as a way of, like you say, an encore career. This is not like our parents' aging. This is an entirely new developmental stage of the human life cycle. And in that regard, it's so exciting to me.
Oh, well, that's great to hear. And clearly you've got a sense, and maybe we can talk a little about, what do you think is unique for us as we get older that makes us want to get more in touch with our spirituality and expanded consciousness? Because I find it in myself, and I know for many other people. I wonder
It's certainly a natural question we ask ourselves as we get older. What is this time for? Who am I now? What's going to happen? And especially as I look into the future and I have to come to terms with the reality of the declining factors in death. So what is this time for? What am I being asked to understand in this period? The spirituality component arises for so many reasons. First of all, because it's the end of life, so you ask spiritual questions. But more than that, aging is an emptying of consciousness. It really, who you used to be, what you used to be, all those things about yourself, identity, time, and story, they begin to fall away. It's like having a jigsaw puzzle of yourself on the wall, and then you start watching the pieces fall out. At first, it's very alarming. Oh, gosh, I'm not that anymore, and I'm not this anymore. But if you pay attention, and if you really try to get in touch with the experience, you discover that the divine or consciousness shines through those open spaces that have been created, and you discover then that consciousness is not just in you, you are in it. And more than that, and more amazingly than that, is the fact that this consciousness does not belong to you. It is the consciousness of the universe, divine consciousness. So when we begin to slow down, get in touch with this process of giving up the old self and opening consciousness to what is all around us, it begins to be enlightened in slow motion. We begin to experience things we never before expected. And in this way, it's an adventure in consciousness. It's not like what they tell you, but it's so much better. But the really important thing is you have to not hang on to the past. Aging is about the death of, not the death, but the defeat of the ego and the birth of the soul. So it's not going to be what you want. It may not be what you're planning on, but it may be 100 times better if you let go and ride down the river of change.
That's what often scares people so much, in a sense of letting go and loss. And maybe speak to, I know a number of people on the call are aware of the paradigm shift of aging, but not everybody is. And your view of aging really is part of that whole kind of paradigm shift and tsunami, and maybe talk a little about that, because somebody has to reach a point where they're not viewing it all as decline in order to open to what you're talking about.
Yeah, aging is a profound experience. I think it's perhaps the greatest growth epic of our lives. It really asks us to do some profound transformation of self and consciousness and all of that, so that we can come into the world in a new way and give back to the world in ways that we never expected. But we need to give up the old paradigm of aging, which is that you keep busy and you deny the scary changes that are reshaping your body and your psyche, and you wait to die and you wonder if this palpitation is going to be the end, for a new paradigm of aging, which focuses on the psychological and spiritual growth possibilities, the social and political engagement opportunities, and new roles in your family and in your community. This new time is about coming alive and sharing your gifts with the world. And then from the mystical perspective, there's yet a third paradigm, a mystical paradigm, which is the vanguard, I believe, of a new kind of life and a new kind of human and a new stage of spiritual evolution, so which brings us into the work of creation that's offering us opportunities that are not part of our original resume. As we put away our old resume, we come into this university of aging, this new curriculum of possibilities, and then our lives come alive again. But you're right, it's scary. And because no one tells us there's anything really good out there in aging, that we just think, oh, our body falls apart and we decline. We tend to withdraw and withhold, and we try to overcome aging. We're going to defeat aging with anti-aging creams and exercise and hormones and surgeries and so forth. And that's okay. And then everybody does that in the beginning, but that's only the beginning. And what happens is that what really happens is it doesn't work, and that you have to eventually, aging wins, and you have to surrender to a life-transforming process that opens up new avenues of conscious growth, and then your life becomes an adventure again. But yeah, there are some really bumpy steps along the way which make people afraid to move into this new era, this new consciousness.
Do you have thoughts on how to help people embrace this time, and not be as afraid?
Sure. From the psychologist part of me, I would say, let yourself feel your feelings. It's normal to be afraid. It's normal to feel helpless and lost and discouraged. This new aging is an initiation into a new time, but initiations are always frightening because I don't know what's coming next. But it's okay to feel your feelings. And the key here is that whatever you feel deeply will change. I learned that as a psychologist for decades of psychotherapy. If you can just give yourself permission to feel and feel, that those feelings will change. They will relieve you of their burden, and the next feelings will come along. And in time, the negative and painful ones will give way to new and optimistic and hopeful feelings, and then your life begins again. So it's about, but it's important also to ask yourself the spiritual questions. And the questions are like, you send these questions down into your psyche like sonar waves, and you wait for the intuition to come back. The questions like, who am I now? What is this time for? What am I going to do with myself? What am I called to do? These are deep and profound questions, but they are the questions that will change you if you wrestle with them. It's like wrestling with the angel. You wrestle enough, you'll find that something is given back to you, and every step is the next stepping stone. You can't know where you're going to be in 6 months, even in 3 months, but you can work on yourself today, and the path will continue to open up to you. And so then the mystical aspect of all this is to gradually learn how to move, in effect, from the left hemisphere of the brain to the right, from the left hemisphere, which is full of belief systems and identities and stories and goals and problems and all the things you worry about, which have so hijacked our consciousness that we don't even realize it, to moving into a space of heightened consciousness, thought-free consciousness, intensely sensory awareness, and we discovered that consciousness is everywhere, and that in experiencing this consciousness, the world itself becomes ever more beautiful and radiant and vital and holy. This is the transition we make in the mystical realm, and it gives, as you walk out into nature, you discover that we never left the garden. It's already here. We just got caught up in this drama of youth and middle age where we thought we had to be somebody in a thought world, in a belief system. And as that falls away in aging, and it does, it naturally falls away because you're not who you used to be, and you can't keep recreating it without it getting very stale. But as that falls away, this new consciousness emerges, and the world is a brand new garden once again. And you are brand new, and in fact, you are not who you think you are at all. You are the consciousness of the divine. When you experience your consciousness as divine consciousness, oh my gosh, everything begins to change, because consciousness itself is a force. It's an energy. It's a conscious energy, and it begins to reorganize your psyche, soul, and purpose in life.
So are there ways, I know some people that I talk about in my psychology practice, some people come in saying, I feel like I'm closed to my feelings, or I don't believe all this new age stuff about.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so how do you respond to that? How do you, if somebody is frightened from your experience of integrating it, how do you help somebody not be afraid to open to the newness and wonder, as you say, of this new life stage?
Yeah, I have a great deal of compassion and feeling for that kind of dilemma, because it is scary. And I really encourage people to feel their fears too, because their fears will lead, anything you feel will lead you back on the path of your unfolding true self. So if you're really afraid, be afraid. Let's talk about the fear. Let's talk about what you're afraid will happen. And little by little you discover that it's not happening, and that gives you gradual confidence. And so I think it's a process of working through the resistances and restoring hope, because at the other side of fear is this, oh my God, my older friends are doing the most wonderful things these days with their lives. They're not sitting in rocking chairs getting old. They are putting on house concerts and doing genealogy and falling in love with horses, writing stories. They're doing things that not only give them back life, but give life to the community and to the world around them. So it's important to let people know that on the other side of the fear is this new life. And I guess one other issue would be loss and depression. There is going to be loss and depression, especially around retirement. People seem to feel like, I'm going to retire, I'm going to be busy, it's going to be great. And that honeymoon lasts for a month, 3 months, or 6 months of frenzied activity. And then people realize, I've lost my community, my work, my focus, my identity, my income, all that kind of stuff. And it's a big emptiness. But in the emptiness comes this new possibility. But so we have to work through our sadness as well. But the same principle applies. If you can feel it, it will change. And it will gift you with the meaning of the loss and an opportunity to go beyond that.
I totally agree with what you're saying, and I think it's so important. I really do like the way that you frame it, and also you frame these 3 steps of this kind of new aging, which is, and you've mentioned already the initiation and alluded to that once one opens up to it, the transformation and the revelation. So maybe speak more about that, of that process that is there for us if we open to it and, as you say, face our fears and deal with the losses. There's that letting go that we need to do of who we were.
Yeah, it's big. I think we never should underestimate how big this is and how frightening it can be and how much loss there is. There were times when I was going through having surrendered my career to this medical thing, I didn't know who I was. I didn't even know if I existed anymore. But I suddenly began to realize that itself is a metaphysical question. I didn't exist anymore in who I used to be. But I was still here. Something was still present and still here, and that gave me the thread to follow into this new space. So anyway, to answer your question, I feel that there are 3 powerful forces that underlie this new aging experience. First of all, in conscious aging, we never lived this long before, so we're offered a new developmental stage. But these forces challenge us to use it in constructive and self-evolving ways. So the first secret of aging, the first force, is that aging is an initiation in this new extraordinary stage of life. And it says that the events and processes of aging, like changing bodies, fading identities, losses of all shapes and sizes, is actually an initiation into a new dimension of life, a time of personal and spiritual growth unprecedented in human history, so that while aging may represent the end of our old life, it's the beginning of a new one. And I think that's the key. But here's what happens. Somewhere along the line, as things have been unfolding in your aging experience, you will be shocked into realizing that everything is different now. You're not in Kansas anymore, as Dorothy might say, and that the middle years are over. So this could happen as a result of a big event like retirement or illness or death of a friend or a loved one, or it can just be a piling up of little events like joint pain, senior discounts, financial problems, new prescriptions that just push you over a tipping point, but you get suddenly that you've left this old world that you were so familiar with for a completely new and unknown land. Okay, so this is the time then to start digging deep for who am I really? What am I doing here? If we don't recognize this as an initiation, as a rite of passage into a new space of consciousness, if we just hang on to the past, then we'll get stuck there, and it will get more and more ossified and frustrating and frankly, depressing. So we need to let go of the past and move on. And so the next secret, and which is even bigger, that's not big enough. The second secret is that aging is a transformation of self and consciousness. And I really have come to realize that it's enlightenment in slow motion. That's such an amazing experience. So this process begins spontaneously, naturally, subtly. And as we wake up from the illusions of mind, identity, time, and story, who we thought we were, all these illusions, as we wake up from these illusions, we transition from personal identity to the consciousness of divinity, giving birth to the enlightened elder. So this is like a huge transformational process if we will engage it, if we won't deny it. So let me unpack that a little bit because it seems so almost unbelievable. The body part's obvious. The transformation of our bodies is right in front of us. I ask the elders at Conscious Elder conferences, they've seen the latest picture of themselves, the latest photograph, and everybody groans. I look at these pictures, I say, who are those old people? I don't know who you are. I don't even recognize myself in there. But that's the key to that, is that who you look like on the outside is just a disguise. It's not who you really are, and what's going on inside is what matters, and it's amazing and it's profound. So anyway, so when we begin to let go of this old self and move on, the true self, which has always been there and really locked into a straitjacket for decades in the middle years, because you had to do what you had to do. You had all these responsibilities. But as you lift that straitjacket, as you let the horse out of the corral, and as it begins to get back in touch with its energies and instincts, new things begin to happen, and that's one of the rebirth possibilities of this aging. So people discover new interests, new goals, new excitement in their lives, and marvelous experience. The true self blossoms again in this transformation of aging. But the spiritual dimension is even more astounding. With the fading of identity, career, and family responsibilities, all that stuff of the middle years, all those structures of mind that dominated consciousness for decades, we can, if we try, become conscious of consciousness itself. It was the consciousness that held all these programs, all these sort of like computer apps that we ran in the middle years of responsibility and duty and identity and so forth. And as we get in touch with consciousness, we discover that it is truly an amazing reality that we've been ignoring for decades. If we are perceptive, we will discover that consciousness is not just in me, okay? It is in me, but it's not just in me. I am in it. It's all around me, and it is divine. A realization the mystics in every religion have described for millennia, and one, of course, that is absolutely essential for enlightenment. So as the puzzle pieces of your old life fall apart and a consciousness awakens, you are beginning a process of natural, spontaneous enlightenment. And as I can affirm, experiencing consciousness as divine, literally your consciousness as God's consciousness, will change you. Okay, this is your opening into the ultimate state, Christ consciousness, Buddha mind, the divine human. And you discover that you are not who you think you are. You are the awakened consciousness of the divine universe, which is timeless, ageless, loving, and transformative. So that's the second secret. And as you can imagine, it's, wow, what do I do with this? But it flows naturally. It's like being on a raft in the river. You come around the bend, you don't have to worry about the next thing because it will simply show up. Jung suggested, Carl Jung, that aging wouldn't exist if it didn't have an evolutionary purpose. And I think that one of the most important evolutionary purposes of aging is actually to transform our experience of the world itself, how we experience the world around us. Pierre de Chardin, this French philosopher, priest, and paleontologist, talked about spiritual evolution as leading to the divinization of the world. In other words, the world beginning to be experienced as a divine and holy place, literally. And this is really an archetypal idea that you'll find in all religions. Okay, I wrote a book called Finding Heaven Here, which has scores of quotes from mystics from across traditions and eras that says in the awakened consciousness of the present, in the experience of presence itself, the world is transfigured in your vision into an extraordinarily beautiful and holy and radiant place. So the third secret says, aging is a revelation of heaven on earth. And it says, as the veil of thought dissolves in conscious aging, heaven on earth begins to shine everywhere. And the world is sacred once again. We have come home from our long journey through the world of thought and invite others to join us in this new consciousness of creation. So you can see that we're discovering a brand new world in this time, too. We're initiated into a new consciousness. The consciousness continues to expand our awareness, and as our mind learns how to become silent and still and open to the transcendent energies of reality, we discover that reality is an infinitely beautiful and precious experience. And we never left the garden. We were never kicked out. That's an old story that's got stuck in the left hemisphere of the brain and continues to make us afraid of aging, which in effect is instead an introduction into a new developmental stage of spiritual and evolutionary growth. I sure talk a lot, don't I?
But it's fascinating to listen to you. It's just, it all flows, so I was no way wanting to. And one,
I just get on a run.
No, you do, and it's the opening to all of this. And so I'm going to integrate one of the questions. I want to encourage people to ask questions, and it's just so many ideas to think about. So I think we have to keep unpacking them as we go along. But Kathy from Rochester, New York says, wow, I'm part of a group of financial professionals, certified financial transitionists with a focus on widows. So many of your comments apply to this group as well, out of their life element into a new stage of the human cycle. And she just has great ideas and language. So I just want to comment on that.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. That makes me very happy.
And I just do want to encourage people to submit questions and comments. So maybe let's unpack it a little bit more. And I know all of your books dovetail into each other, and the most recent is The Divine Human, which you've just begun to talk about. But I wonder if you could talk a little about some of the gender differences. I know one of your books particularly was about men in the process, and just wondered if there are thoughts on how different people, genders, or even different ethnic groupings or people who've been religious in the past or not, and how that impacts opening to this kind of new stage and these secrets of the new aging?
Sure. There's lots of questions in there. I'll just...
Yeah, I know that. Sorry.
That's wonderful. I love wide open things. So I wrote this book called What Aging Men Want. And it was like, I've worked with men a lot in my career. I was very active in the men's movement with Robert Bly and James Hillman and Michael Mead. I put on numerous men's gatherings in Sacramento. It's a very rich thing, and men have such a hunger for growth experiences because they're so locked into this sort of straitjacket world of button-down middle years. But anyway, so I wrote this book about what aging men want, and I was looking for a myth that, like what Robert Bly had, the myth of Iron John that talked about men at midlife. What was the myth that was going to talk about men in aging? And it just dawned on me, like a muse spoke in my ear and said, it's the Odyssey. Homer's Odyssey, 2,500 years ago, talks about this aging warrior coming home from the war. He was in the war for 10 years. It was a horrible war. But it takes him another 10 years just to get home again. And I looked at all of the adventures he was having, and I realized that every adventure symbolically encoded a developmental task that men needed to face on their long journey home. So the point is that what men need to do, we are told that men are going to be happy when they retire. They actually believe that's true, that they're going to play golf and go traveling and be with their grandkids. And most men just think it's going to be an easy transition, but it's much harder than it looks. The happily ever after fantasy of retirement glosses over the serious inner work men need to do in aging, because the transition from busy middle-aged family man and worker to wise elder is more complicated than it looks, representing actually a long and transformational pilgrimage from the male midlife to an awakened consciousness and a new spiritual journey in aging. So anyway, to say, as I looked at all the tasks, all the adventures he had, I came up with the fact that there were 18 growth challenges that men had to face. I won't go into all of them, but they fell into 4 categories. They were falling into categories of early mistakes, transformational experiences, homecoming, and final challenges. And examples of this were like they had to give up that habitual, conquer everything approach to life that guys have, okay? They had to overcome the temptation to bury their angst with alcohol or drugs or mind-numbing activities like computer games. They had to surrender their own heroic male self-sufficiency, I don't need any help, and come to terms with helplessness and dependency. Men don't do that very easily. They had to deal with unresolved feelings about women, face the reality of death, choose the real relationships they have over fantasy idealizations. They had to terminate a lifetime of warrior strivings, and they had to reconcile with a family that for many guys they have not been as close to as they should have been or could have been, because they were off in the wars of adult life. And then they had to accept the reality of old age and understand the spiritual work attending this homecoming process. So what looked like a very simple thing wasn't. I interviewed 40 of my really close male friends who had a lot of friends in Sacramento. So I just sat down with each one of them and said, "What's it like for you?" And it became really clear that while most guys say that they're busy as ever and they're happy, when you go get beneath the surface or you talk to their wives, you find out it's not truly the case, that it's a lot tougher than it looks. So that's the whole male piece, and I really would encourage you to give What Aging Men Want to your husband or father, whoever, because, it invites them on a heroic journey of giving up the hero and coming into the soul, which is really the task. Now, I think for men and women, it's often different. And Jung pointed out that the men, we are each born with masculine and feminine energies in our psyches, and men have feminine and women have masculine. But the way the culture has worked for so long, historically speaking anyway, men went off into the world, did the masculine thing, conquer, quest, overcome, defeat, get out there and win the war of life. And then somewhere in the 50s, they got really tired of this patriarchal warrior model, and they just wanted to let that go, and they start having dreams of retirement. And what men often want to do in this phase, as they get more deeply in touch with themselves, is to open feminine, to begin to feel the spontaneous, natural love they have for family and children and grandchildren and pets and plants. And they just want to love. So many of my older male friends just want to love the world, and they're looking for ways to do that. Where now, on the contrary, for women, they were working with this whole feminine side from the beginning, many of them, at least in the old models. Changed a lot, of course, recently with the intersecting of everybody's doing everything. But the point is, if you've used up your feminine, then as you get older, you're going to want to get more active in the world. And one of my friends, Carol Arsborn, has her website called Fierce with Age, and that really summarizes this. I'm getting out there. I'm going to kick the patriarchy in the knees. I'm tired of the way things are going, and I'm going to change things. And that's a wonderful male energy that I totally support. So it may be that you're going to discover in yourself some unexpected feelings that you think, oh, there's nothing wrong with me, but it's not. It's just that you're living out now the other side of your psyche, that this is a profound opportunity for both new growth and new contributions to the world. So men and women can do it differently. Women, of course, do multitasking so much better. They have a larger corpus, so they can juggle things, and men are more linear, so they have a harder time with these transitions. At conferences, I often have the women come up to me and say, I love what you're saying, but I can't get my husband to pay attention to read this stuff. He just wants to play the computer games or go play golf or whatever. And because guys have a hard time getting off that conveyor belt of performance. That's just the work.
It sounds like a very good idea of either the men picking up the book about what aging men want, as well as women giving it as a gift. But I think it is more complicated for men. I think even just the post-retirement and connecting and engaging with people is harder for men. I know in one of your books you had mentioned Barbara Marx Hubbard, and her talk about, you had quoted her about after menopause it's regenopause. And I really like that concept that for women, that after that menopausal phase, that there's that time for the creativity, the productivity, and still being alive and full of juice.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to comment on that there, because I know that you had mentioned her. I think you've been influenced by her as well as Jung.
So a piece I skipped over on the men is that is the incredibly important place of men's groups. Mm-hmm. Men thrive in men's groups. I've been in men's groups for 20 years. And once you get a good men's group going, and that has to include no talking about politics, conquest, work, but just talking about your experience of this time of life. Men, they won't leave the group. They will make every session. This is the one place where they feel really fully understood, because the other guys are having the same problem. And it's a deeply stabilizing community of guys who support each other through thick and thin to find a way into a new life. So I really would encourage men to find a men's group. Sometimes therapists run them. Sometimes you can start your own. But actually, in the back of What Aging Men Want, I have lots of ideas about how to form a men's group.
Oh, that's great. Great. So I have a couple of other questions here that sort of will keep this discussion kind of nice and fluid and going. Rosemary from Delray Beach in Florida says, how do you share these ideas with people who don't believe in God? Maybe you can talk about that, kind of the religion.
Well, that's an interesting question. We have this whole mindfulness movement, which is talking about consciousness, pure consciousness, here and now, present consciousness. They never talk about God, but you've got all the same stuff going on. So you don't encourage people just to read about the consciousness movement, because it's really an indication that our whole culture is beginning to, quote, wake up to this larger reality, this larger consciousness that's always here. So you don't have to believe in God to do that. And Actually, everybody believes in something ultimate. If you're a secular humanist, it might be justice. If you're a scientist, it might be understanding the principles of the universe. That ultimate thing is what you're really trying to understand, and it's your path to this experience of unity, which we all live in but don't fully experience. But if we could, we would be much closer to one another and much more at peace. So it never works to debate God. It just doesn't. And it never works to argue about religion, because that just locks you in the left hemisphere of the brain. Mm-hmm. I really encourage people just to be who they really are as they become more spiritual beings. And in that sense of calm and loving presence that you fall into as you give up this heroic stuff, the love is just there. And so you impact people without having to argue with them about anything. Your very presence involves and includes the presence with a capital P. And that energetic field encompasses the other person. And you don't need to talk about anything. You're just there with them, and they are beginning to be drawn into a kind of experience that you don't have to label. So I guess that's my long response to a very good question.
And another question from Don from Canada. He says, as I understand them, virtually every faith familiar to most of us regards as heresy the path of divine humanity that you're suggesting we embark upon. Do we need to break with traditional belief in order to grow spiritually? Why or why not?
That's a powerful question and a really important question. And there was Rumi tells a story. He's this wonderful Sufi mystic, but he was a professor in his middle years, and he was very interested in the academic life. And as he's carrying all of his books down the road, Shams, this enlightened, crazy, wild spiritual figure, jumps over the fence, throws his books to the ground, and says, "Now you must live what you know." There comes a time in the spiritual journey when when it's incumbent upon you to give up ideas, because ideas will lock you into more ideas. You will not find, what we're really looking for is an experience of the divine, not more beliefs about it. How many books have we all read that talked about God this, God that, and these theories and theology and so forth? And they were just more ideas. As Werner Eckhart said, the truth believed is a lie. What really needs to happen is we need to stop thinking, heighten awareness, and experience the omnipresent consciousness that's everywhere. Then there's no belief, there's no arguments, but we begin to change. I would recommend that people you don't have to give up your beliefs, just don't have them for a while and open up this other space of consciousness in the right hemisphere. Jill Bowe Taylor, neuroscientist who had this left hemisphere stroke, so she's a scientist. She studies the brain. She speaks in language of the amygdala and the frontal lobes and so forth. But in her awakening, she starts talking about the left hemisphere doesn't work anymore. So she's steadily talking about being one with the universe and having this ineffable joy and love and mystical awareness. That's in our hemisphere. It's always there. So what we need to do is not get stuck in belief systems and dogma, but to move into this first-hand experience of the divine dimension, and all your questions will get answered, okay? Because there it is. You're experiencing it. Am I making myself clear?
Yeah, I think you just broke up a tiny little bit. Are you on a cell phone?
I heard something beeping, so I wasn't sure.
Maybe somebody was trying to call you, or maybe your battery's going, so check on that.
No, my battery's good. Okay, good.
Oh, your battery's good. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I have a question here from Linda from Sarasota, Florida, who says, John, I teach and facilitate groups interested in the subject of conscious and creative aging. The subject of spirituality clearly is pertinent here, and I totally agree with what you're saying. What I'd appreciate, however, if it's possible, is that you define more specifically what you mean by the word spirituality, the word enlightenment, soul. So that's her kind of question. If you can just... Yeah,
sure. I think that's a very valid and important question. Mm-hmm. We need to make it distinguish between religion, spirituality, and mysticism, and we need to clarify our vocabulary. Mm-hmm. So mysticism really is the first-hand experience of divine, unmediated, and it falls into three categories. So the little mystical experiences, like when you look at your baby right after birth for the first time and just are in awe of the infinite beauty of this little person. That is a small mystical experience. You are one with something that is so intuitively divine that you just in awe of it. So there's little ones, there's big ones, and the big ones are actually the source of all the major religions. Some huge religious experience happens for somebody, and then they spend the rest of their time trying to describe it. And then their followers, who see how amazing it is, try to encode it in theology and belief and ritual and practices and so forth. And that's how religions form. So they form out of one or more major mystical experiences. And then there's a third category of mysticism, which is mystical consciousness, which is what we begin to open up in aging. And it's a process in which, when you stop thinking, heighten awareness, intensify perception, open the awe experience, the AWE experience of the world, and come into the presence, you discover that everything is now, just as they describe it, a mystical experience, not to the same degree, but to the same qualities. And you begin to confirm everything that religion have been talking about without having the theology of whether there's original sin or whether there's one God or many gods or any of that stuff. You just begin to experience those kinds of unfolding intuitions firsthand. So that's mysticism and religion. Now, spirituality, as I view it, is how each of us makes sense out of our lives, out of our mystical experiences, religious education, everyday experiences. So in a church of, say, 200 people, there is one religion, but there will be 200 different spiritualities, okay? Because each of us has got to make sense that, well, I like this, but I don't really agree with that, or this is what happened to me, and it qualifies the way I experience this principle of my religion now. So spirituality is the personal meaning we give to it. And so we're on a spiritual journey, but of making sense of the world from a perspective of ultimate meaning and ultimate divine conditions. And then, but we're also in search of the mystical experience itself. Does that help?
I think that helps. And I'll just say to Linda, if there are more questions or other people too, just ask, and I'll have John clarify that. But I think that is helpful to clarify the terms, even though it's the left brain, in order to help us be able to shift. No, but to be able to shift to the kind of what the experiential part of it is. Because there's so many just interesting things that you're talking about. I wanted to shift a little to, just because I know you've been involved and are involved in saging and this whole notion of elder consciousness, and I wonder if you could speak to that, and also how these dimensions of the psychological, spiritual, mystical, divine consciousness, how it both helps us in our sense as we get older of being a conscious elder, as well as responding to some aspects of the global crisis that we're in now.
Yeah, let me think about that. Conscious aging organizations really encourage all of us to give back in some way, to find, because we're so involved in this process of growth, that the growth itself clarifies what matters to us most and how we care about the world, and then we want to give to the world. We want to give back our history and our wisdom and our experience, our skills and so forth, and making it a better place before we leave. So this is a real call, not only from the organizations, but from the deep psyche to give something back. So conscious elders become activists, because social activists, and some organizations are much more focused on social activism and some organizations more on personal growth, but they all dovetail in this direction. When we begin to integrate our spirituality into our giving back activities, it further enhances our work. There's several ways this happens. One of the ways is called sacred activism, where the depth of your spiritual commitment moves you to care for the world in a profound way, deepening the personal meaning of the work. So you believe something with such depth that you might go out there and help, because that's what you feel called to do. There's a second way called subtle activism, which David Nicole, Nicol, writes about a lot, which is when a group of like-minded people come together, we can create a subtle force field of healing energies, and then we can send them to traumatized places or people in the world. So in other words, when we pray and meditate and do rituals together with a deep intentionality, we generate a coherent field that affects the deep ground of being and can radiate to any place. So this is like the Maharishi effect, where lots of people meditating in a city full of violence, you actually get objective changes in the rate of violence in that city for the time people are meditating. It affects the whole conscious field of the community. And then there's a third form of spiritual integration, where you really awaken divine consciousness in yourself, okay? And I talk about this as in the Divine Human, where the mystic now becomes the prophet, because in the experience of mysticism, the boundaries between you and the world and you and others begin to get very thin and they fade away, so that what is happening to you or to other places around the world is happening to me, because my boundaries now are including all of this, so I can't sit still. I am affected and I feel it. So this, as a conscious elder, we begin to get out of our compartmentalized worlds and into a much more global and community and here and now focus on what we can do to bring healing, joy, and love to the world. Now, I want to point out that elders often think that they have to do something great and heroic, because that's the old model of growing up. You got to save the world, you got to cure cancer, whatever. But it's really not about that, and it's rarely the case. Theologian Howard Thurman says, he has a wonderful way of expressing this. Let me see if I can find it. He says, don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And in recovering your true self and this process of aging, this work we're doing on ourselves and aging, we come alive again. And coming alive is a profoundly spiritual thing. It's who you really are in the world, who you were meant to be, the gifts you were given as a person to share with the world. So you can't sit still now. You want to share them. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to go out in the world. Introverts may do it very differently than extroverts. So there's not one size fits all. But when you find your own call, then there's a sense of joy, because, now I know what I can give. And it doesn't mean that you have to go to a third world country, or it doesn't mean that you have to adopt people, or you may want to, but it also may mean that you just treat the people in your life with a new kind of love, and that you care for the animals, and you may become a vegetarian. Things will change for you that reflect your changing unity with the world. And in that sense, whatever changes you is changing the world, and as more of us do that, the world itself gradually changes. I think we're on the cusp or the threshold of a new kind of world. It's a world that is unfolding as more and more of us kind of wake up to the futility of war and dominance and control and legislation, and more to we each are living, how we are living our lives now as human beings, full of potential and love and kindness. I don't know where I went with that one, but
that's certainly a hopeful view. But maybe expand, because you're really talking more about, I think, your concept of the divine human, and maybe just share more of that. It would be so wonderful if people could get in touch with that part. But is
sure.
that, I have not yet read your most recent book, The Divine Human, but is that sort of what you, maybe tell us a little about that?
Yeah, the subtitle is The Final Transformation of Sacred Aging. And I really think that it's the potential that we all have already. We've mislabeled so much for the left hemisphere, so we don't call things from a spiritual perspective. We always call things from a materialistic or a scientific perspective, which is useful, but it's not the whole thing. So the divine human is someone who experiences himself or herself as literally divine, okay? It's a state of consciousness that changes the way you experience the world. But in order to do this, you have to give up all your expectations and beliefs about what you think this is going to be. Okay, what you think is going to happen if you're a divine human, because that will take you right back into your thought world, and you get tangled up in thought and so on. So as you surrender all these belief systems and come into pure, wide-awake consciousness, you begin to discover a space that's free of identity, time, and story, and the whole problem-ridden labyrinth of the mind that has been driving our lives. And in this consciousness, because who you are is a fiction created in the left hemisphere. I'm this, I'm that, this is my history, these are the things that define me. But when you stop thinking, it's like in meditation, when you really get to a place of pure space, that guy's not there anymore. She's gone. I mean, that identity has disappeared, and now what is left is a new space. And the mystics have been telling us about this forever. For example, Thomas Merton says this. He says, our external, superficial self is not eternal, not spiritual, far from it. This self is doomed to disappear as completely as smoke from a chimney. So it is with one who has vanished into God by pure contemplation. God alone is left. He is the I who acts there. He is the one who loves and knows and rejoices. The mystics are in my new book. I've got dozens and dozens of quotes from mystics from across traditions who are all saying the same thing, that as we wake up and as this sense of self that has been running us like a program for all these years quiets, we discover a whole new dimension of ourselves. And in the depths of this dimension, we discover that our consciousness is the divine consciousness. And deep in the depths, the fathomless depths of being, that great force rises up when you begin to feel it, rushes up like a tide full of love and joy and vision for the world. So that this is all possible. The problem we have is that this other man's question says, the religious world has often, especially in the West, it's not at all this way in the East, in Hinduism and so forth, in Sufism, it's really okay to be the divine. But in the West, which is very patriarchal and hierarchical, religious experts would lose their power if the mystic said what he believed, because he didn't need experts to tell him what to believe. He experienced it firsthand, he or she. So the authorities began to say, you can't be this. If you say you can know God firsthand, that's heretical. If you are mystic, that's heretical. And definitely you can't be God. But being God is not what you think, because nothing is what you think. It's only when you stop thinking and experience what is that you discover what it really is. And that's the process. So I have a whole series of sort of transformational realizations in the book that have to do with all consciousness is actually divine consciousness. All being is divine being. And as we merge consciousness and being, you feel this, what the Hindus call Sat Chit Ananda. You get this existence, consciousness, bliss experience that has always been there. We just mislabeled it and never had time for it. In aging, we have time for these kinds of realizations because aging is itself a gradual enlightenment process.
Mm. That's just a lovely way to think about it, and there's so much there. You also, I know, talk about that we're not alone in this point in time, and you've spoken a little about it, but the influence in asking our ancestors and angels.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little about that?
Sure. I had this dream a month ago that just floored me. So I'm back in my family home in Sacramento, and I'm on the second floor between several doorways, and I turn around, and there's my dad. And he's been dead for 30 years, but he's there. And it's not just a dream. He is really there. I can see him exactly as he is. The same pants, flannel shirt, and sports jacket. And he comes rushing over to me, throws his arms around me, starts hugging me and kissing me. And he's so glad to see me. And I keep saying, Dad, what are you doing here? What's going on? And so, to make a long story short, eventually he tells me that he wants to come back to this world in order to give what the knowledge and the things he's learned over there to help us begin to heal the split between the secular world and the divine world. And it's the more you wake up, the more conscious you become, the more you realize how thin is the barrier between the worlds. If unity means anything, it means it's all one space. But we've been so taken over by the left hemisphere's concepts about the world that we stop experiencing the world itself. But when we dissolve concepts and open consciousness, we discover that the divine world is already here, and that our ancestors and angelic figures and spirit guides, they're all over the place. I used to think that this was just a happy, sentimental thing until my dad showed up, and I began to really look at it more deeply. And I understand that so many people, Matthew Fox talks about this a lot. He says he sometimes asks people to close their eyes and then raise your hand if you have a spirit guide or figure, or if you know somebody who sincerely does. And he says, like 80% of the hands go up, because this is a universal experience that people naturally are called to. We just don't talk about it much because the left hemisphere world says you're crazy if you do. But we're not. Mm-hmm. And so this inviting the ancestors back is such a gift, such a possibility. And it's easier than we realize. We can really open a relationship with them through kind of dialogue, visualization things that really reveal information that we would never have had if we didn't have this conversation. So there's much more going on, and the worlds are trying to come together. And in the process, we are wanting to literally discover a brand new world that has always been here that we've not been in, and we can let go of the old world and come into the new world and have a unity that is profoundly healing and will give birth to the next stage of our whole conscious evolution.
So many wonderful things to think about, and it just underscores, too, that sense that people live on inside of us, and we keep learning and opening to the new, and it's quite lovely. Can you talk a little, John, just what your novel's about? Because you had mentioned that the novel sort of integrates. Just tell us about the novel, of how, because maybe mention the novel.
So I really wanted to put all these things that had flowing out of me in books. I wanted to put it in a story format, and so I wrote this novel called Breakthrough. It's about a middle-aged psychologist who takes on a new client who's very depressed and having terrible symptoms of despair. But he begins to start having these really amazing mystical experiences. But the psychologist doesn't know what to do with them. He thinks it's just craziness, it's just some kind of delusion. And so therapy begins. And the more the client, Paul, begins to talk about these mystical experiences, the way the world lights up, the way everything becomes infinitely beautiful and precious, the way his heart opens, this whole mystical process that's unfolding for him, it begins to affect the psychologist himself. And so now the psychologist begins to wonder if he's going crazy or what to do with these profound feelings. Meanwhile, the client's wife, who is in a very conservative church, begins to attack the psychologist, thinks he's practicing religion without a license. And so there's pickets outside the office, and she turns him into the board of psychology. All manner of things happens. And so the therapist, the psychologist, goes off, he gets a flyer for a vision quest experience in the desert. And so he says, I got to get out of here, so I need to clear my mind. So he goes out onto this vision quest experience. And lo and behold, begins to have his own visions and experiences of the divine world and how this whole thing works. So I won't tell you more than that, because I don't want to ruin things. But everything in the book, in effect, is true. I just fictionalized my own experience of this process in a way that invites people into it from a fictional point of view rather than from a discursive or logical point of view.
Oh, sounds fascinating.
Oh, I love writing it.
Yeah. Well, how long ago did you write it?
Oh, about 4 years ago.
4 years? Wow. Okay, I look forward to reading that one. I've read a few of your books, as I said, but not all of them yet. There are a lot of them out there.
Yeah, I got
and just to remind people, but I have another question for you too, but I just do want to remind people that the special gift to all of us is to go to John's website, which is johnrobinson.org. Is that right? And there are talks that he's given, interviews he's given, blog posts that are available to read or to download. So I just want to encourage everybody that is available for you. But could you also, while we're still here, just maybe give an example of a fairy tale? I know you have a book about fairy tales that symbolize some of the tasks of aging. Maybe if we could end with that.
Yeah, so I wrote this book about fairy tales and myths and stories that talk about the same experiences. It's called Bedtime Stories for Elders, what fairy tales can teach us about the new aging. And so in one of the fairy tales, I write about the story is about King O'Toole and his goose. And it's a wonderful story about this old king who loves the sporting life, and he's out there riding across hill and dale and chasing things and being a hunter and so forth. But one day, as in the passage of all things, he gets old and he has a heart attack and he can't do the things he used to do. So he looks around for something else to engage. And actually, he's a very wise guy. And so he takes on a goose. And this becomes a very funny story for a while. And so the goose fulfills his same joy of life. The goose flies around the lake and brings them back fish and does all sorts of things. But then one day, the goose herself, and incidentally, the goose looks just like the king. The goose really is the king's soul in metaphor. So the goose one day gets old just like the king. The king becomes so discouraged about life now. He feels like it's over and there's nothing left to live for. And just about that time, St. Kevin shows up. This is this wonderful saint, but he doesn't acknowledge, he doesn't identify himself, he just shows up. And in the story, the king is just about to throw himself into the pond and to drown himself, which is like a metaphor for throwing himself into the conscious and disappearing. But what happens is that St. Kevin, this wonderful saint, begins to draw him out and tells him, I will fix your goose. I will make your goose good as new if you'll give me your whole kingdom. And the king basically doesn't hesitate for a moment. Says, absolutely, here, take my whole kingdom. I'll bring my goose back. Because the message is he wasn't attached to material things. He was willing to give up everything to come back to life. And so St. Kevin grabs the goose and does something spiritual or magic. It throws it in the air. The goose is as good as new, and the king is happy and he lives another decade or so in the way he was living. And St. Kevin gives the goose, the kingdom back to the king, and he's welcome to live there. But it's all a metaphor for giving up identity, time, story, and possessions, and awakening to this other world where you are once again freed like the goose to fly around the kingdom of your imagination and of the world and alive in new ways. So that's a story of aging that tells us that it shows us the developmental tasks necessary for us to move from the middle years of identity, time, and story. I got to be this person, achieve these ends, and make these goals, to letting all that go and once again discovering the magic of life, and the wonder of existence, and coming back to life.
That's lovely. And it really is part of this whole kind of embracing these bonus years that we have and this opportunity that it's new possibilities is what you're talking about, new beginnings, both internally as well as how we connect and interact with the world. It really is a wonderful life stage.
We just have to surrender the old self, the old identity. Yeah. We won't. It's like a straitjacket. We won't get there unless we shed our old skin to give birth to a new one.
And what you highlight, too, is it's a choice. And I guess it's fear sometimes that keeps people from making that choice. But as you say, confronting the fears and recognizing that there are losses as you open to this, but just how exciting it is to open to possibilities.
We've never lived this long before. That's the thing. Right. So we don't really yet have a fully developed mythology and spirituality for this new time of life. We're living 15 to 20 years longer than we did. In 1900, the lifespan was like 45. And so we don't know how to open this new time, but it's an incredible opportunity for personal and spiritual and mystical growth. Wow. Dive in.
No, it's exciting, and I've gotten some comments from people saying, great seminar, many thanks, and just people wanting to hear from you. I think there's one person that I'm going to connect you with who had sent an email, not really a question, but I'm going to put you in touch. But I think we need to pull it together, and you've sort of done the kind of pulling it together, but I just want to give you another opportunity to just what would be a final takeaway you'd like people to have, and maybe why don't you also mention about your website and how people can get your books, and then maybe a final takeaway before we say goodbye to everybody.
So in order, what would I want to say? This is a transformational time, this aging thing. The old grim view of aging was you're sitting around waiting to die, and it's just it may have been true in the past, but it's not true anymore because we have this new aging that gives us 15, 20 more years of life. But what is it for? It's not just to get old and ossified and complain about our aches and pains. It's to surrender this old self and give birth to an entirely new kind of life, full of love and kindness and spiritual growth and wonder and transformations. Do not be afraid of aging, even though there are painful things. It's always about giving up stuff that we're hanging on to, but in the giving up to it, we come out the other side even more expanded. So that's the takeaway is let it happen. Get on the river of life and let it change you because you will grow so much in the process. And what was the second thing?
If you wanted to share, I know I mentioned, but if you just want to share how people can get your book and have access to your website.
You can come to my website and see the books, and then they're all on Amazon, and they're all at all the major websites that promote books. To find a book you like, read about it online, and you can download it from the website so you can have it sent to you. It's so funny. I just came into this experience and suddenly there was this explosion of creativity in me, and out came 5 books, and I almost could not stop writing. It was just rushing through me. So you pick the one you like. They're all moving in the same direction, and they're all unfolding in this wonderful vision. And I'm happy and I have an email address there, so you're certainly more than welcome to leave me a message, and I'll be happy to get back to you and answer a question further.
Oh, that's wonderful. And really, it does sound like it's just flowing out of you and just all keeps coming together, different layers and steps to it, which is just wonderful. That could be a whole other topic of how this has been part of what's flowed out of you as you've let yourself open to all these possibilities for yourself and yourself connected to the world.
The fountain is always flowing.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you again so much for being here and sharing all of this. And I want to thank everybody who was on the call. And John, thank you. I hope maybe you'll come back another time. And
I would love to. Thank you, Dory. You've been wonderful. I appreciate the opportunity to share this with you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. So take care. Helped us embrace that today. So thank you, John. Thanks so much. Take care.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.